Greetings, fellow OpenInsight Software Developers. My name is Robert Lee, and welcome to the third video in a series in which I talk about using OpenInsight and a new tool called O4WX to publish software on the internet. In the previous video, I said we'd take a peek behind the scenes to see what an OpenInsight software developer has to do to work successfully with O4WX. First of all, I'd like to prove that this form is in fact generated from an OI form. This is a website called random.org, and I'm going to ask it to generate a random number between 1 and 100,000. Let's make it 1 in a million, shall we? And there's a big number. We'll copy that. We'll now go into development mode of OpenInsight. We'll bring up that form. And I'll paste that number in here. Okay, so I'll save that form. I'll hit the refresh on this login screen. And there we have the number generated by random.org. While we're behind the scenes here, let's take a look at one of these buttons, in particular the login button. And we'll go to events. And you'll see here that there's a click event. And you may or may not be familiar with this. I believe this is a fairly new feature of OpenInsight, or at least a new option, which may have come in around about OpenInsight 9, I'm guessing. But I'll just clear this event out. And see the second option over here under Quick Event Options is Call Commuter Module. That creates all of that information there. In essence, what it's doing is calling a program called @self, and @self is the name of the form. So it's calling a program of the same name as the form, and that is a very good definition in my view of what a commuter module is. It's a program of the same name as a form, and it contains all of the code that's required to support that form. I'm not a fan of scripts over here. I am of the view that best practice is to put all of your code into a commuter module. So we'll have a look at the commuter module for that form. Now the first thing that you might notice if you've experimented with O4W is that the name of the form is not prefixed with O4W. That is unnecessary when working with O4WX. So this commuter module of the same name as the form supports both the Windows environment and the Internet environment. The next thing somebody familiar with O4W will notice is that there is no create event. Now in O4W, the create event would normally contain the code that creates all of the controls that you see on the form. O4WX takes care of that, so no create event necessary. So the click event simply calls 3 different routines for the 3 different buttons that are on the form. Going back to our browser, we'll log in now. And we'll have a look at this subscribers form once again, because I see there's a bit of blank space here. I'd like to add a country option to this area here. So what we'll do is is close out of here, and we'll go to that subscriber form, and I'll show you how in O4WX we would go about doing this. We need to create a label. We need to create a drop-down, and conveniently I already have a field called country ID. Doesn't need to be that wide. We'll also create an edit field, database associated to country name, which is a symbolic field. No prizes for guessing what that does. So now we'll go into events, and we'll set up an event. On the drop down event we shall execute a pop-up, and conveniently I happen to have a pop-up in here called countries. Okay, so before I save that form, we'll just have another look here, and you'll see that there is no country on this version, so we'll close out of here, go back to the form and save it, go back to the browser, and we'll go back into subscribers, and we have a country code. Looks a little bit too narrow there. There's a reason why it looks too narrow. Need to change that in this instance. That's probably not very helpful either. So we'll save that, go back to our browser, and we have a country code, and the symbolic is working, except I'm not from Afghanistan as it happens. My wife is from Australia, and that's close enough. Well, it would be if it was here. There you go. Australia. But you notice it didn't recalculate the name of the country code. Okay. So we'll just save that and close out of here. We'll go back into this form, and upon the changed event we shall send a message to country name, and that message is please calculate. Okay, save that. We'll go back in. And it says here I'm from Australia, but actually I'm from Afghanistan. As you can see. And that's proof positive. So, in essence, O4WX picks up on everything that you'd expect it to pick up from an OpenInsight form, including the events and messages and so forth. So creating an application in O4WX is in fact the same experience as creating an OpenInsight application, with some slight subtle differences. In particular, I'd like to draw your attention to these four buttons which are positioned over here: clear, save, delete and close. I draw your attention to those because you may not have noticed in the last video, but on this video we have those only 3 buttons, and they're over here. They're not in the same separate box over here. Now do you notice this extra unused space down here? That's unused because this box has been pushed wide by those buttons. This is just the strange way that HTML works, and this is where we have to learn to work with HTML rather than fight against it. So if we go to the organizations, what we'll do is we'll copy this group control and paste and bring it over there. Actually, before we do that, let's stick another button in here. Called close, and in the event of a click, it closes the window. Okay, so I'll save that form and we'll see what it looks like. Oops, that's the wrong one. Go away. I have to use the menu close. Okay, we've got a close button now, and again you can see with the extra button it's created more unused space over here. So working with HTML, rather than fighting against it, we'll move these buttons over here. Notice how wide that close button is. Really wide now. We'll save that. Close out of here and come back in. And in HTML, it likes to use as little space as possible, and so we no longer have any spare wasted space, except for this wasted space here, and that's caused by this being as wide as it is. So there's no reason why we couldn't make these controls a little bit wider just so that we use up the space. And that's an example of the tweaking that I was mentioning earlier that's required to play with an OpenInsight form in such a way that we're working with HTML, not fighting against it, and we get a presentable final product on the web page and following best practice of HTML in the process. Join me in the next video where I shall pose some awkward questions of myself about O4W, and I shall attempt to answer them. Thank you for listening.